In a world that often demands justice, sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is mercy. Explore the complex stories of forgiveness and the incredible strength it takes to let go of the past. Subscribe now to experience these deeply moving human dramas.
I had just pulled out of my daughter-in-law's driveway when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I didn't look at it right away. I was still thinking about the way my son had hugged me goodbye at the door. That long, tight hug he doesn't usually give. The kind that makes a mother's chest ache in the quietest way. He'd been visiting for 3 days, and now he was back home. And I was heading back to my house 40 minutes away with a thermos of cold coffee and the radio playing something I wasn't really listening to. The phone buzzed again. I pulled into a gas station on Route 9 and picked it up. It was a text from my neighbor. She's lived next door to me for 22 years. We've shared a fence and a fig tree and more than a few cups of tea on my back porch. She doesn't text very often. When she does, it's usually to tell me my sprinklers are running in the rain, or that a package was left at the wrong door. This was not that kind of text. Don't go home yet. I need you to call me first. Please. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I called her. She answered before the second ring. Are you still on the road? She asked. I just left, I said. What's going on? There was a pause. A short one, but the kind that has weight to it. Something happened this morning, she said, after you left for your son's place yesterday. I didn't want to worry you, but I think you need to see something before you come back. See what? Just come to my house first, she said. Not yours, mine. Okay? I said okay. I didn't understand, but I said okay. Let me back up a little because none of this makes sense without the full picture. I'm 63 years old. I've lived in the same house for 31 years. I raised my son there, buried my husband there. Not literally, but you know what I mean. The walls of that house know me. I planted every shrub in that front yard. I know which floorboard creaks near the bathroom, which window sticks in the summer, which drawer in the kitchen needs to be lifted a little before it'll close. I know that house the way you know your own hands. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is, what he's always been to me, is 41. He lives out in Ohio now with his wife, Pamela. They've been married 7 years. I'll be honest with you, I never fully warmed to Pamela. Not in a dramatic mother-in-law way, more like a low hum of something I couldn't name. She was always perfectly pleasant to my face, remembered my birthday, called me on Mother's Day, said all the right things. But there was something careful about her, something managed, like she was always performing warmth rather than feeling it. My son adored her. That was enough for me to keep my mouth shut and my doubts to myself. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that Pamela had been doing things that had nothing to do with my son at all. She had been doing things that had everything to do with me. My neighbor's name is June. She's 70 years old, and she's sharper than a tack, and she does not miss a thing. She's the kind of woman who notices when someone parks on the street, who doesn't usually park there. She keeps a small notebook by her kitchen window. I used to tease her about it until the day I was glad she had it. When I got to her house, she was already standing on her porch. She held the door open, and I went inside and sat down at her kitchen table. And she put a cup of tea in front of me without asking, the way she always does. And then she sat down across from me and folded her hands and said, I need to show you something on my computer, but first I want you to take a breath. June, I said, you're scaring me. I know, she said. I'm sorry. I've been sitting on this since yesterday morning and I didn't sleep a single hour last night. She turned her laptop to face me. She had a security camera. I knew about it. She'd had it installed the previous fall after someone had been breaking into cars in the neighborhood. It was mounted on her porch, angled toward the street, but it caught a wide enough view that it also covered the stretch of sidewalk in front of my house and part of my driveway. She had pulled up the footage from the previous morning, the morning I had driven to my son's house in Ohio. Just watch, she said. The timestamp in the corner read 9:47 a.m. My car was already gone. I'd left around 8. The street was quiet. At 9:47, a dark blue sedan pulled up and parked across from my house. A man got out. He was somewhere in his 40s, heavy-set, wearing a gray jacket. He looked up and down the street the way people do when they think they are being watched and want to make sure they're not. Then he walked straight to my front door. And Pamela opened it, I felt the air go out of me. She had a key. She let him in. As to June, she said nothing. She just nodded at the screen. They were inside for 47 minutes. 47 minutes with the curtains I never close, because I live alone and I like the light, suddenly pulled shut from the inside. When the man came back out, he was carrying a canvas bag that he hadn't come in with. He put it in the trunk of the car. Pamela stood in my doorway and watched him drive away. She was wearing the kind of calm expression people wear when something has gone exactly according to plan. Then she went back inside my house. She didn't leave until nearly 1 in the afternoon. I watched the footage twice. I didn't say anything for a long time. June refilled my tea. She was quiet too. She understood that I needed a minute. How did she have a key? I finally said. And that was when I remembered. 2 years ago, my son and Pamela had come to visit, and I'd had a plumber scheduled and I couldn't stay home for the whole window. I'd handed Pamela my spare key and said, hold on to that, just in case he needs to come back while I'm out. I never asked for it back. I hadn't thought about it since. Why would I? She was family. She was my son's wife. I put my face in my hands. There's more, June said quietly. I looked up. She told me that she'd gone back through her footage, not just the previous day, but as far as her system would let her go, which was about 60 days. And in those 60 days, she'd found 4 other visits. All of them on days when she knew, or could reasonably guess, that I wasn't home. Once when I was at my doctor's appointment that runs 3 hours. Once when I was at my cousin's house for her granddaughter's birthday. Once when I had driven up to see an old friend for the weekend. Pamela had a pattern. She'd been in my house at least 5 times without my knowledge. I should have said something sooner, June said. But the first few times, I thought maybe you knew. Maybe you'd given her permission. I didn't want to make trouble over nothing. You're not making trouble, I said. The last time was too much, she said. The way she watched that man drive away, the way she closed the door after, it didn't look like a family visit. I didn't go home that day. I called my son first. That was the hardest phone call I have ever made, and I have made some very hard phone calls. I called to tell my son that his father had died. I called to tell my college roommate that I'd been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer 12 years ago. I thought I had some understanding of hard conversations. I did not know how to tell my son that his wife had been letting herself into my house without my knowledge, and that there was video evidence of her bringing someone inside and leaving with a bag of what? I didn't even know what yet. I called him anyway. He picked up on the second ring. He sounded the way he always sounds on a Tuesday afternoon, slightly distracted, a little tired, his mind probably half on a work email. Mom? Everything okay? I said, I need you to sit down. He was quiet for a very long time after I told him. Not the silence of someone who doesn't believe you, the silence of someone who does believe you, but is sorting through every memory they have, looking for the places where things didn't add up and now suddenly they do. She asked me a lot of questions, he said slowly, about your house, about whether you had a will, about, Mom, she asked me once if you still had Dad's coin collection. My husband had a coin collection. It was not enormously valuable in a financial sense, but it was the kind of thing that's worth knowing about if you're looking for things that can be quietly removed and sold without leaving much of a trace. I need to check the house, I said. Don't go alone, he said. I went with June. We walked in my front door, which was locked, exactly as I'd left it. No sign of forced entry, because there was no forced entry. And I started in the room I knew best. The coin collection was in a cedar box in the hall closet on the top shelf. I had to get the step stool. My heart was going fast in a way I am not proud of. The box was there. I opened it. Half the coins were gone. The ones that weren't there were the ones my husband had always pointed out. Not the most beautiful ones, but the ones with real value. The 1916 Mercury dime. The 1909 VDB penny. The Walking Liberty $50. I sat down on the floor of my own hallway with the open box in my lap. June stood in the doorway. She didn't say anything. She knew which ones to take, I said, and that was the detail that broke something open in me, because it meant she hadn't wandered in and grabbed what was visible. She had done research. She had listened to my son talk about his father's collection over the years, had probably asked questions that seemed casual at the time, and she had known exactly what to look for. This was not impulsive. This was planned. My son drove back from Ohio that night. 6-hour drive, and he was at my door by 10. He didn't look like himself. He looked like a man who had gone to work that morning with one life and was going home to a different one. We sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning. I made scrambled eggs at midnight because neither of us had eaten, and it was the only thing I could think of to do. We ate scrambled eggs and we talked. He told me things I hadn't known, that their joint account had been drawn down significantly over the past 8 months. Small amounts, irregular, the kind of withdrawals that don't trigger alerts but that add up, that Pamela had taken a sudden interest in estate planning conversations over the past year, questions about what happened to assets when an elderly parent passes, questions framed as thoughtful and responsible but that he now heard differently. I missed it, he said. He kept saying that. I missed all of it. She didn't want you to see it, I said. That's different from you missing it. The next morning we went to the police together. June came too with her laptop and 3 months of footage saved to a thumb drive. She printed out a log of the dates and times, each entry noted in her careful handwriting. 22 years of watching the neighborhood had made her thorough without her ever knowing it would matter. The officer we spoke to was a young woman who listened without interrupting and wrote things down in a way that made me feel like she was taking it seriously. She asked about the coins, about the key, about the pattern of entries. "Do you know the man in the footage?" she asked. We didn't, but she said they might. It took 11 days. I know because I counted them. 11 days of going through my house room by room, making an inventory I should have made years ago. 11 days of my son calling me every morning before work. 11 days of June bringing food over in the evenings because she said she wasn't sleeping well anyway and she might as well cook. On the 12th day, the officer called me. The man in the footage had a record. Not violent, financial crimes. He was known in certain circles as someone who moved things discreetly. He had been brought in for questioning. He talked the way people with records sometimes do when they see the alternative clearly. He gave them Pamela. My son called me the morning your arrest was made. He called me before anyone else. I think he needed to say it out loud to someone. And I think I was the only person he trusted to hear it without making it worse. They picked her up this morning, he said, at the house. I didn't ask how she'd reacted. I didn't ask what she said. There would be time for all of that. Court dates, statements. A process that would unfold slowly and would require things from both of us that we weren't ready for yet. "How are you?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about Dad's coins," he said. "I keep thinking, she sat at your kitchen table. She ate Thanksgiving dinner with us. She held your hand at Dad's funeral. And the whole time." He stopped. "I know," I said. "I trusted her." "I know, sweetheart." We stayed on the phone without talking for a little while. Sometimes that's the only thing that helps. The missing coins were recovered. Most of them. The man had moved them to a dealer 2 states away, but the records were traceable once someone was looking. Some of the money from my son's account was harder to follow, but the investigation was still active. Pamela had a lawyer. There would be charges. The process would take time. I'd spent enough years watching the evening news to know that justice rarely arrives the way you picture it. Clean and swift and satisfying. It arrives slowly and imperfectly and leaves you more tired than triumphant. But here's what I know. My neighbor noticed. My neighbor kept her notebook and her camera and her habit of paying attention, and it made all the difference. Not because she was looking for trouble, but because she cared enough about the person next door to take a pause before dismissing what she saw. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if she hadn't texted me that morning. If I'd driven straight home and walked into my house and never looked at what was missing, or looked and thought I'd simply misplaced things the way we tell ourselves we do at a certain age. How long would it have gone on? How much more would have walked out that door in a canvas bag? I don't like to think about it. After everything settled down a little, after the first wave of it, I went over to June's house with a bottle of good wine and a pecan pie I'd made from scratch. She opened the door and looked at the pie and said, "You didn't have to do that." "I really did," I said. We sat on her porch until it was dark. We talked about the neighborhood and her daughter's new baby and the fig tree, which had been particularly good that year. We didn't talk about Pamela or the coins or the footage or any of it for most of the evening. Near the end of the night, June said, "I almost didn't text you, you know. I told myself it was none of my business. I talked myself out of it twice." "What changed your mind?" I asked. She thought about it for a moment. "The way she watched that car drive away," she said. "Something in her face. I've lived a long time, and I know what satisfaction looks like when it's pointing in the wrong direction." I nodded. "Thank God for that," I said. She refilled my glass, and we sat together in the quiet, and the evening came down around us the way it does at the end of a long and honest day, slowly and with something close to peace. I still think about the coins. Not their value, though some of them are worth real money, and the investigators did recover most of them. I think about the fact that she knew which ones to take, that she had sat at my kitchen table year after year and listened, asked the right questions at the right moments, smiled when my son talked about his father's collection like she was just a daughter-in-law showing interest. That kind of patience in the wrong direction is a terrible thing to witness in hindsight. What I've come to understand, not from a book, not from a sermon, but from living through it, is that the choices people make tend to catch up with them. Not always quickly, not always in the way you'd expect, but the pattern of a person's character eventually shows up in the shape of their life. Pamela had spent years building something, a careful performance, a long con, and when it collapsed completely. The man she'd hired talked. Her own record of entries into my house was sitting on a thumb drive in my neighbor's kitchen. There was nowhere to go. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it with a kind of quiet recognition. What you do in the dark tends to find the light eventually, not because the universe is watching and keeping score, but because deception requires maintenance. It requires lying to one person, then another, then keeping those lies from touching each other. That takes a toll. Things slip. A neighbor notices. A timestamp exists. A record doesn't delete itself. June noticed because June is the kind of person who pays attention and then trusts what she sees. That's not a small thing. A lot of people see something that doesn't sit right and talk themselves out of it twice before breakfast. She almost did too. She told me that herself. But she didn't. She kept her notebook. She kept her camera. And when it mattered, she made the call she was afraid to make. That took something from her. A kind of moral courage that doesn't announce itself. She wasn't sure it was her business. She wasn't sure it was her business. She wasn't sure I'd believe her. She did it anyway. I've thought a lot about what it means to be that kind of person. The kind who acts on what they know is right even when the easier path is silence. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel heroic in the moment. It feels uncomfortable and uncertain and possibly wrong. June sat on what she'd seen for weeks before she texted me. She turned it over. She questioned herself. And then she decided that the discomfort of speaking up was smaller than the discomfort of staying quiet. That's wisdom, the real kind. Not the kind you read about, the kind you earn by living long enough to know the difference between caution and avoidance. My son blamed himself for a while. I understood that. But I kept telling him, she studied you, she was careful. The failure wasn't in his ability to see, it was in her willingness to deceive. Those are not the same thing, and collapsing them does damage to the wrong person. What I carry forward from all of this is simpler than I expected. Pay attention to the people who show up quietly, without fanfare, and do the right thing when it costs them something. They are rarer than you think, and they are worth more than almost anything else in a life. June brought me a fig from our shared tree last week. Left it on my porch with a note that said first of the season. I read it standing in my doorway and felt, for a moment, like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be.